What is going on, wrestling fans?
No.
Welcome to another edition of Sean Moody's Moments right here on 10 Count Media. Sean, how you doing today?
All right, I started the clock. You have a minute. Let's go.
A minute? Oh my, we're gonna be.
Did you say moments or minutes?
Moments. But today we are talking about Sgt. Slaughter and his Iraqi sympathizer gimmick he had in 1990 and 1991. And this is one of the most talked about storylines and gimmicks still to this day because of how controversial it was. But let's jump into a subject for a second, because sometimes you hear the argument of wrestling is too real, and sometimes you hear the argument of wrestling is too fake. Where do you land on using real life situations like this situation with Sgt. Slaughter in Iraq and Kuwait in a storyline?
Well, Steve, throughout history in professional wrestling, I mean, that's where you got a lot of your storylines between what was happening at the time and how can we work this into a story. That has certainly happened forever, and it's very effective because people can identify with it. But then there are moments where it's just too, maybe too real. It hits too close to home in certain situations. You'll see that sometimes when they try and do one with a kind of a personal vendetta between two guys, where it might have something to do with one of their love interests or a child or something along those lines. And sometimes they can go a little too far. There's been moments like that through history. And then you have other things that are happening as far as current events. And this is a classic example of that with Sgt. Slaughter. And now you talk about everything is generated by what they call heat, of course, in the business. And then there's en fuego. This was one of those examples. And I'm sure when Vince cooked this up, he knew they definitely had something. And they had the right person to do it. And this is when they brought Sgt. Slaughter back. And as Bob tells the story, as Sarge tells the story, that when he was called to have this meeting with Vince, he thought, awesome, I'm going to come back. Tells his family that, Sarge is going to be back in the military, controlling and being the All-American.
Yeah.
And that's not what Vince had in mind.
No, sirree. And even before that, Sgt. Slaughter was in the WWF with Vince Sr. and, of course, Vince Jr., Vince McMahon. And he was one of those patriotic characters. G.I. Joe came about, and that caused a rift between Sgt. Slaughter, because technically, even in today's world where a wrestler is making outside money without including the company, well, sometimes that's a no-no, because technically, did the company make you popular and that's why you have these business deals, or is it the other way around? And so he had feuds, though, with Iron Sheik, Nikolai Volkov, anti-American characters. But in 1990, when he came back, this is where the Iraqi sympathizer character is brought up. And now go back a few years ago, prime time with Sean Mooney. You had the distinction of talking to Sgt. Slaughter for over 3 hours about his career. But the clip we're about to play from that interview is the exact conversation you brought up, where Sgt. Slaughter gets a phone call from Vince McMahon, and he's explaining to his family what this is all going to be about. So let's play that clip, and then we'll come back and dissect it.
So my wife and I and the girls, we have dinner that night, and I guess where I'm going tomorrow? Where? To Vince McMahon's house. Oh, what's going on? I said, well, I think Vince come to his senses, and he's going to take Sgt. Slaughter, the real American hero, G.I. Joe, and he's going to make Sgt. Slaughter the real American hero, G.I. Joe. And I kept thinking, now, how is he going to do this? How's he going to do this? Because Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior were pretty well established, and so I go to his home, and we have this meeting, and he says, here's my plan. WrestleMania 6 had just ended like 2 weeks before that. And he said, I want to go to WrestleMania 7 with you and Hulk Hogan. And I said, really? You're going to make Hulk a heel? And he goes, no, I'll make you a heel. I said, you're going to make Sgt. Slaughter, G.I. Joe a heel? Come on. He goes, no, here's my plan. So he shows me a drawing of the L.A. Coliseum, 104,000 seat capacity, screens everywhere, big screens on 4 sides of the Coliseum, and he shows me the diagram and all that. He said, I want to put 104,000 people in here, and I know you and Hogan can do it. And I said, well, how are you going to do it? He said, well, here's the situation. You know what's going on over in Kuwait? And I said, yeah. He said, well, what I want to do is bring you back as a sympathizer for Saddam Hussein and Iraq. That you can't understand how the military of the United States of America could be so weak and allow Saddam Hussein to overtake Kuwait and not do anything about it, and that they're, he goes through the whole thing. I don't want to go through it all.
Yeah.
So I'm just kind of like floored. I'm kind of like listening to him, and you know how Vince gets into the character. And I'm shaking my head, and he goes, what do you think? I said, I love it. He said, well, I want you to go home and talk to your family, talk to your wife and your children, because it could be, some ramifications, And I said, well, okay. Well, but as soon as I got in my car, I knew I was like screaming and hollering and singing, and I was so happy that not only was I back with the WWE, but I was going to be up.
Well, ramifications, he said, ramifications. And certainly there were some. Now, Sean, when you were talking to Sarge, you brought this up, and Vince McMahon is pitching this idea. Now, what would you think if someone came up to you and was like, hey, we're going to make you this character because right now there's a Gulf War, Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, but we're going to make you Mr. G.I. Joe, Mr. America, into this guy who denounces America, says America's weak, and pretty much says that you think Saddam Hussein is pretty awesome. Like, what would you be telling your wife and kids when you come home? Like, hey, he's getting this idea. What should we do?
Well, you heard Sarge there. He was in the car screaming and laughing and can't believe it because, and I'm sure you've talked to many of these professional wrestlers. They love being a heel. It's the best. They say it's the best part of the business when you get to be a bad guy. And Sarge was a tremendous heel. If people remember back, if they knew even before he became Sergeant Slaughter, he was an unbelievable heel. And as you can imagine, and as we saw, he could certainly pull it off. So to him, I think he's looking at it from a storyline viewpoint. I don't think he had any idea how much heat could come with this storyline. And I think before we really get into that, let's talk about heat and people, so people understand that back in the day what it was like. And I remember, Hacksaw Jim Duggan telling me that, when he was with Mid-South, they love the heat. The Coliseum where they would wrestle, the way they could figure out how, what kind of a night it was going to be by how many fights there were before the matches started, and how they literally had to have not just police escorts, like SWAT team kind of escorts to the ring, in and out of there sometimes when the heat was so bad. People took this stuff very seriously. People got hurt, death threats, that whole thing. Freddie Blassie, I remember him telling me that one time, he was a master of heat, that the fans destroyed his Cadillac convertible in the parking lot of the LA Coliseum, destroyed his car because they hated him so much. And how they would, guys that going in and out of arenas and ambulances so that the people wouldn't see them going in and out. So it was a whole different level, and it was still like that, as we've talked, that it was old school, and people were very into these storylines. And this one, I'm sure Sarge at the beginning of it thought, this is great. He's probably thinking of all the possibilities and all the things he could do, but he had no idea what was coming.
Now, you bring that up too about, the territories and having heat there. That's completely different, I feel like, in this world 91, because we're on cable television, we're on pay-per-views, we're on a large scale of doing what we were doing before, where riots were cool for the territories because you were in small areas, so you could get out. This is how do you escape being a public figure on television while saying these things about America? Because in today's world, everyone has an opinion on how they feel about anything in this world. You could be right or wrong about any situation. But in 91, it's like, if you say you don't like America on television and you're from America and American fans are paying, to come see you, that heat is a whole different story. And I'm not a wrestler, so I don't know the inner workings of my mind and body being like, well, this is a good idea no matter what. But this one might be the point where you're like, okay, is this where we made a mistake? Yeah. Because we pissed off a lot of our fans?
Far.
But how do you know you've gone too far until you've done it, I guess?
That's exactly what happened. They figured they'd ride it as much as they could and see what would happen. But where it went, I think, was way beyond anything that Vince had imagined. Good for business, that's for sure. But then you're also possibly endangering people's lives. So where do you draw the line? Where do you pull it back?
So for you personally, when you were there seeing this, what did you think? Oh, this is just a wrestling storyline. That's it.
No, I was like everybody else within the company. I mean, it just made perfect sense. And Sarge was the perfect character. Who else are you going to put in a situation like that than the beloved Sergeant Slaughter, All America? And he really, I mean, he lived the part so much. He was Mattel's spokesperson for G.I. Joe. So he was perfect for that role. And then, of course, bringing in General Adnan Al-Qasi, that was brilliant too, because he was from Iraq. He had the story goes that he actually went to school with Saddam Hussein.
Yeah.
Spoke the language and was brilliant at his part of that whole story.
And what's crazy to think of this, he actually looked like Saddam Hussein.
Yeah.
When you look at him,
pictures. Yeah, they used to put pictures up. It's crazy.
That to me is one of the most craziest things, because you're like, okay, we're gonna really go into this Iraqi sympathizer. Oh, we're also gonna give you this guy who looks exactly like Saddam Hussein.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. What
and I don't think even Vince expected that. That was the bonus. That was a little extra. Yeah. But pretty much you looked at a lot of those. You used to see a lot of those doppelgangers, as they would say, of Saddam Hussein. And he had a number of, people that would they impersonate him, basically, so people wouldn't assassinate him. And they all had, the big mustache. It wasn't that difficult to do. But he was. It was right on. He really did, and definitely played the part.
And over the years, too, and with involving in war, we have seen characters like this, Sergeant Slaughter and General Adnan, where we're fighting Germany. All right, now German characters are going to be evil. Oh, we're fighting Japan. All right, we're going to have Japan characters who are evil. Like in America, that's how it worked. Yeah. And then I think they tried the same thing here. And obviously it worked to a point, but also you're putting your employees, Sergeant Slaughter, and anyone involved with him at risk. The next clip I want to play is Gene Okerlund and you and many different people were involved with interviewing professional wrestlers. But when you interview some people out in the open, well, things might go awry. People might get nervous about meeting next to Sergeant Slaughter because people are now threatening his life. So we're going to play a clip about Sergeant Slaughter and Gene Okerlund and how he felt about all this.
We started doing the vignettes on a different bases and things, and you were into that part of it where I I started out by myself, and down America and how weak they are, and how they could let Saddam Hussein overtake Kuwait without any problem, and blah blah blah. Yeah. So then we got to where Vince thought that maybe we should have somebody else join me. So I said, well, how about a manager? And he goes, well, who do you think? And I said, well, there's a guy in Minnesota by the name of Adnan Al-Qasi, but he goes as the Sheik. And I said, he's from Iraq. Yeah. And I said, if I'm not mistaken, he went to college with Saddam Hussein. He speaks the language. Wow. What better guy? I'll bring him in as my general.
Yeah.
He says, okay. So he makes the calls, or whoever he has make the calls. We're in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and here comes Adnan Al Casey, not
General
Adnan
Adnan
at all. So Vince said, "Well, go put your outfit on and come back in my office and show Sarge and I." So here comes Adnan, walks into Vince's room, and I thought Saddam Hussein had walked in the door. He looked exactly like Saddam Hussein, and he had a plastic gun and holster on his side. And I said, "That's unbelievable, but get rid of that damn gun. Don't give anybody any ideas." And Vince says, "Oh, yeah, get rid of that." He said, he said, "Give me a promo like you would do if, you were Sarge's guy." So he started doing this Arabic promo, and I just like, I was grinning from ear to ear. And I said, this is it. So our first night in Hershey, Pennsylvania, we had a riot going. And it was just incredible how well we worked together. And he would just talk in Arabic, and then Gene or you or Brother Love would say, what did he just say? And I said, "This is what the general just said." I would start my promo, whether what he said,
whatever it was.
So we got so much heat.
Yeah.
One night, I believe it was Philadelphia, Gene Okerlund refused to promo us. He said, I'm not going out there. Somebody's going to get shot. Somebody's going to get killed.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's heat. That's what you call serious heat, Steve.
That's when you know things are going awry, when Gene Okerlund is like, "I'm good. I'm not going out there," because he's afraid to be shot. When do you ever go to work when you're not, say, a prison guard, that you're worried about being shot?
Well, let's not forget, I was kidnapped by General Adnan and Sergeant Slaughter. So I found out firsthand just how evil they could be.
They tried to convert you?
Held me hostage.
Maybe Ian
on the roof of an unnamed building in an unnamed location. If you'll recall from prime time when they abducted me. So they really, and as Sarge mentioned, they worked tremendously well together. They were very much on the same page. I love the fact when you talk about no matter what the general said, and of course Sarge would then paraphrase
of course.
What, but that was it. You could be in those, and when you're in the arena, when they would come out, you could just feel that the building turn. You could just feel that emotion, because there was a lot of patriotism. A lot of people think back in different times in our history, of course 9/11, but it was along those same lines that America was America first.
Oh yeah, and especially speaking Arabic, where people don't understand what you're saying, so they're assuming that you're bad mouthing them, because it doesn't even matter what he could have said anything. Like, it's a sunny day, it's beautiful outside, it's raining, it's cloudy. People are like, "How dare you? You're not speaking American, and I don't like this." Like, that's, and then of course Sergeant Slaughter being like, "It doesn't matter what he's saying," and just
and just disrespect the flag. That's enough. That'll get you in big trouble in an arena with a bunch of Americans.
And you have to, give dedication to this craft, because Vince McMahon pitches Sergeant Slaughter this, as first clip was 2 weeks after WrestleMania 6. Yeah. So we're talking about, we have plans for WrestleMania 7 already in the books. Like, we know what we're doing, and we're going to get there, and it's going to be a long, bumpy road, but we're going to do it. Like, was there ever a part of you seeing all this play out and like, I think they might have to switch plans because things are getting a little too heated. If me and Gene's worried about getting shot and you're getting abducted, well, things might be happening.
Well, and that's where Vince saw the opportunity, because of, all that was happening in Kuwait. I think it was in August when that invasion happened in 90. And so, Vince did see all this being laid out. What's also interesting, though, Steve, is to think about, like you said, it was shortly after WrestleMania 6 when we'd seen the torch passed and the whole thing, that Vince is already thinking ahead that, Hulk's going to go away for a little while, but we've got plans here. And maybe, was it an original plan maybe involving the Warrior? Who knows? But it certainly played out. And Hulk, the All-American, was also perfect for the role too, to step up and stand up for the United States.
It's true that you bring that up, because last week you talked about WrestleMania 6 and how we kind of brought up that it seemed like they didn't really have plans for Warrior after WrestleMania 6. Well, as far as his own words from your podcast, Primetime Mooney, he's saying Vince is already pitching Hogan versus Slaughter.
Yeah, that's really amazing to think about, right? That you're already, because, we having the discussion, did people know that Hulk was going to be back? Well, at some point, but the next WrestleMania after he'd gone to Hollywood, who knew anything about that? But Vince, always had a backup plan, and this was part of it. Maybe it was going to be another match on the card with Warrior defending the championship some other way. But once again, they had plans, and it saved that WrestleMania for sure. I mean, you look at the rest of that card; it's okay, but how many people really can name the blockbuster matches on that WrestleMania 7 card?
Besides Warrior and Savage in the retirement match. Oh, I guess Jake versus Rick the Model Martel in a blindfold match. And for blockbuster reasons, that's it. The rest of it is like, if you want to bring up history, like Taker fought Snooker in his first WrestleMania match, but like no one cared about that until the streak actually was acknowledged, which was like 10 years after that. But man, it is kind of sad to see that Vince was already like, well, Warrior won 2 weeks later. So Hogan versus Slaughter, WrestleMania 7.
Well, we've also talked about that too, is that, what do you do with the Warrior? He wasn't exactly layered as far as a character as where you could take him.
Did Warrior love America? We don't even know. Like, we don't, he's from outer space, maybe, possibly. Like we didn't really know his thoughts on the flag, I guess.
Yeah. Well, the Warrior is one of those examples of that. He needed a belt, as we talked about.
Yeah, we brought up last week as well. The 1991 Royal Rumble, Hogan and Slaughter beats the Ultimate Warrior for the championship, setting up WrestleMania 7. Mm-hmm. But there's a moment in this match where the Macho Man smashes his King Scepter in Warrior's face. And I'm guessing it's gimmicked, but I'm not sure it's gimmicked, because after discovering a clip from your interview with Slaughter, I've come to think that was not a gimmicked scepter, and this was a receipt from a moment that happened between Warrior and Savage on the road. Let's listen to this clip and then figure out, was this a receipt or is this a gimmicked scepter?
Vince calls me up. Sarge, we got a little change of plans. I said, not stop. And he goes, no. Randy Savage broke his hand against the Warriors last night. And I've got to put you in with the Warrior and finish up all their matches that are already booked, And I said, oh, okay. He said, I'm going to give you Sherry. Put Sherry with you for a while. And then we'll put Adnan back with you. So I think Adnan went with somebody else for a while. Or maybe he just stayed out of the picture. And so I had Sherry, and we did all kinds of matches with the Ultimate Warrior.
That must have been an experience.
Oh, man. The first time I wrestled Ultimate Warrior, he was supposed to hit me with 3 clotheslines. The first one I could hardly get up from. And I made it up for the next 2. But I got back to the dressing room, and I kind of made it clear that he could hear it, that if anybody hits me with a clothesline like that again, they better be ready for a receipt.
Yeah.
And so he kind of gave me a nod, and he kind of whispered to himself, "I'm sorry." So then we got along just fine after that, because I would give him receipts back, and he knew if he hit me, way too hard. I could take a punch, but you want to get up and finish the match. You don't want to be knocked out.
And you got to keep working.
Yeah, keep working. So we went on this rampage, and we got to Royal Rumble in Miami, and it was time for us to set up WrestleMania 7. And so Randy was healed, and he was ready to go back to a Warrior. So we did the thing where Randy came out and hit him with a scepter, and I didn't really have to pin the Warrior. He hit him so hard, I think it was kind of a receipt for breaking his hand. And all I had to do was put a finger on him, and I could have pinned him. But, instead of, doing the quick 1, 2, 3, I got up and I threw an elbow on him. Like I, was the one that caused him to lose. So I threw an elbow on him, covered him, referee 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
So I didn't want everybody to say, well, Randy Savage is the one that,
Right, yeah.
So I put the elbow in there. So I could always say, well, I hit him with the elbow.
Right.
So just, what I learned over those years with Harley Race and all those other great generals in the ring. So off to the races, I go with Hogan.
Wow. Well, he hit that elbow, so technically Sarge did defeat Warrior that day at the Royal Rumble for the WWE.
I love those stories, though, Steve. That we've talked before about. That was the Wild Wild West. There were no backstage meetings. You didn't discuss how the match went, and please don't hit me so hard with that clothesline. They either settled it in the ring or backstage, and it wasn't necessarily a discussion when they did that.
Yeah, and there's a history of Warrior stiffing people. If any interview, any wrestler I've ever talked to who has wrestled him has talked about the abuse that he would give to people in the ring, and clearly Sergeant Slaughter said to him backstage, like, "Don't do that again."
Yeah.
Don't do that again.
Say it nice the first time, yeah. But that's how it worked, and it's amazing to me how many lessons that the Warrior had to learn before it set in, because like you said, several stories where they'd go out there and he just wasn't like butter with him, as they say in the business. And he got paid back a lot by some very big names.
Yes. I've heard stories of Andre just sitting on him in matches just to teach him a lesson of don't hit me hard because I'll sit on you and you can't get up because, I'm super, super big. The scepter shot, though, if you ever watched the 1991 Royal Rumble, check it out because, again, I'm not sure. Maybe it is, maybe it wasn't. That scepter looks legit. And when he smashes him in the face, there's glass everywhere. It shatters to pieces. The only thing left is like the handle. And he doesn't come in gently. He pops him in like a baseball bat to a ball. He hit him as hard as he could in the face. Now, Sarge is saying the theory is he did that because Warrior broke Savage's hand. Now, this is not ballet, but at the same time, is that a common thing in wrestling where it's like, well, you hit me so hard, so you're not going to see it coming, but I'm going to get my receipt on you. Yeah.
And a lot of them know it's coming. You could see that a lot of times with, a chair shot. Those guys are skilled professionals. They know how to hit somebody with a chair. And if they, like you said, if there's a receipt coming, it's not going to end well because they know where to place that chair where it's going to have its most effect. And you look at some of those back then, there was no way that there wasn't a lot more behind it. So that was just one example. But yeah, absolutely. And guys knew that's how you took care of each other in the ring, for better or worse. In a sense, you take care of me, I take care of you. They were people that were independent contractors. They had to be able to get up and go to work the next day. And Sarge, mentioned there, he could take a shot, but he wants to finish the match. But beyond that, you've got to continue to support your family. So if somebody takes you out with a serious injury, you're out for weeks. That's taking food off the table.
Especially Randy with a broken hand, how is he going to wrestle with a broken hand? I know some people have for years, and because they knew if I don't wrestle, I don't get paid. So, Cowboy Bob Orton with a broken arm for 3 years, and Owen Hart with an injured arm, like things of that nature. But so after this match at Royal Rumble, is there discussion? Are you aware of Warrior being like, man, Savage, like as Sergeant Slaughter goes up to Warrior saying, hey man, you hit me too hard, what's up? Did you ever hear a conversation of Warrior going to Savage after this and saying, "Hey, dude, like you smashed me in the face with this thing"?
No, I'm sure that I never heard about that, but I can tell you there would never be a conversation like that. That's not the way it was done. It wasn't somebody would go back and say, "Boy, why'd you do that? Did I do something wrong?" No, it was just that's the message. There's the message. There's no other communication needed after that, because Warrior, I'm sure, was well aware. if that injury to Randy's hand came through either carelessness or arrogance or whatever, you're going to pay for that. There's a fine line. If it was a pure accident, those guys have been in the ring long enough to know whether it's somebody not doing their job or if stuff happens. There's no doubt about that. You're talking inches between shots. You've got an elbow that's supposed to go by somebody's head and they got to sell it. Well, sometimes that thing gets, that you got two bodies moving out there. So they're not always going to be in sync, but they're professionals. They know well enough when things happen, how it happened.
Right. And so again, if no one's
ever going to have a discussion backstage going, okay, let's go through that. What did I do? Should I put my, geez, I'm sorry. That's not how it works.
Especially, I can't imagine someone being like, oh, you might have broken my hand. Well, I smashed you in the face with a scepter. Well, what do you have to say now? Like, hey, man, you hit me too hard. Well, hey, man, you broke my hand. Like, there's what are you going to keep doing? The argument of, well, you did this to me.
Back a little.
Yeah.
Why would he have done that?
Yeah. Why would he hit me so hard with that? But seriously, if you ever watch it and you hear the crowd too, like when Savage hits Warrior in the face with the scepter, the crowd goes like, you hear the noise, because the glass goes everywhere and he's holding his eyes. It looks like, and
that scepter, it may have been gimmicked to the glass part of it or whatever, because certainly it would have done a lot more damage and there would have been blood everywhere. But I'm sure the scepter itself was probably a nice fighting stick in a sense.
Right.
Yeah. So like that the glass may have been gimmick, but the rest of it, that's not how it works. And it's not how the materials are manufactured.
Of course. Now, like I said, we're off to the races for WrestleMania, but we have to keep building and we got to get us to Hogan. So there's an idea pitched of let's burn the American flag on television to get even more heat for this patriotic match. What are your thoughts on even having the idea of let's burn the American flag? Because there are going to be major consequences for doing something like that.
Yeah. Not a good idea, really. Even people might even, for those who understand it's a work, for anyone else, it's, might look at it in a sense that you're taking advantage of the way people in America view our flag for commercial purposes, if you want to break it down to that. But all the way around, I thought, no, that is just not a good idea in any sense. I was even thinking, like where stomping on the flag was enough to, cause serious uproar in an arena. But setting a flag on fire, man, that was absolutely bad idea. I thought that from the very beginning, and I was like, oh, I hope they don't do this.
Right. And especially because you have a live audience in the arena while you're doing this. There's a difference, I think, between if you're saying playing a terrorist on television, a television show or in a movie, and you'd say burn the American flag. Well, there's no audience live inside of the moment happening to react except in the theater or watching at home. But when you have 20,000 people sitting there and you're burning American flag, the reaction is going to be completely different than a television show without an audience. I think it's not a good idea. But also I see the thing where it's like, well, Sergeant Slaughter really isn't a terrorist. He's really not an Iraqi sympathizer, but he is burning a symbol. And that symbol to a lot of people means something important. That'd be like burning like a cross, or Jesus or things of that nature. These are not normalized symbols. These are up on a pedestal. We love these things more than life sometimes.
Yeah.
Wars
and taking it too far.
Right.
You had the heat. Do you want to just blow the roof off? And who knew what would have happened? But I just think there would have been more damage out of that than any good that it would have done that whole storyline.
Right. It was already heat enough. Do you have to do something that's like, oh, why don't grab Hogan's children and shoot them on TV? I'll get some heat. It's like, what are you doing? Like, we can't go beyond. Though this moment is toned down, they don't burn the American flag, but they do burn a Hulk Hogan shirt, but it is on a pole like a flag. And on the Hulk Hogan shirt, there is an American flag design. So where do you land on that? Where it's like, we're not going to burn the real flag. We're going to burn a shirt that has the American flag on it. That's also on a pole.
Yeah. I was okay with that. You know, the t-shirt. Okay. Of course it had, you know, the symbolism on it, but I think it accomplished what they set out to do.
Yes, of course. They did, because bomb threats and death threats start to occur at WWE headquarters, and Vince McMahon and Sergeant Slaughter's family are threatened to be killed and murdered and have their families in the WWE HQ bombed. So while you're at work, are you being told by HR or other employees like, hey, we have to leave the building today because of the bomb threat?
No, I don't remember that call, because, you know, I was over at Hamilton. But at the same, but there was, you know, they did put the word out, you know, be cautious. It was a different time as far as you know, us at arenas, especially going in and out of there. But also even around that, people knew where we were. Stanford was world headquarters. So there was, you know, word put out, just, you know, be more cautious. If you see anything that's unusual, or someone hanging around the buildings or driving by, or whatever, please make sure you alert people about that. But we all knew, really, the ones who were in the most danger were those that were involved in that storyline. And as we found out, you know, there was that was revealed later, just how serious it got for Sergeant Slaughter and his family and the others that were involved in what was going on with that.
Well, Sergeant Slaughter had to wear a bulletproof vest to the ring.
Oh, it's crazy.
For safety precautions. Now, you've been working there for a few years at this point. Has something like this ever occurred where suddenly you're hearing, oh, I heard there's death threats, or there's bomb threats for the building? Like, there was no storyline that would have brought this up except for just a crazy person calling up.
And at that point in time, really, as I talked about before, you know, prior to that, with the territories and stuff like that, you know, there were some people that were just some serious fans. And, you know, death threats were real. Guys got stabbed going to the ring. I mean, and guys waiting for, you know, certain wrestlers leaving arenas wanting to beat the crap out of them, and, you know, bar fights. That was very real. But at that point, no, that was, at least with the World Wrestling Federation, WWE, there was, it wasn't, I hadn't seen anything on the level. There was certainly heat, and people did get letters, and there were death threats here and there with nutcases out there, but nothing like this. And that was, for me, it was kind of a wake up call to realize, you know, that the vast majority of people that followed what we did knew what it was all about. It was entertainment to them, but there was as with anything else, as we see even today, there is a faction of people that you know, they're in a different world. We're talking mental illness,
right? And
you have to take that stuff very seriously when you get a threat like that. And of course they did, but man, thinking back to just the level that went to, is still pretty frightening to think about.
Well, that's why I think it's still brought up when people make, say, like top 10, you know, storylines that affected the business or went over the top and things like that. This is always on the list, because how often are you hearing about bomb threats, death threats, wearing a bulletproof vest to the ring? There's only probably a handful that involve that set of circumstances. But WrestleMania is still coming up. They're going to go to the Coliseum. 100,000 people are supposed to be here. But WrestleMania 7 has to relocate to the Los Angeles Memorial Sports Arena, only holds 16,000. Now, for years upon years upon years, there have been so many stories about why was it moved. Was it because of port ticket sales? Was it because of safety precautions? Because the Super Bowl had a bit of a millions of dollars were used for security reasons at the Super Bowl that year because of what's happening with the Gulf War in Kuwait and Iraq. So Sergeant Slaughter, when you interviewed him a few years ago, gives us his story and the facts that he was told of why they had to move to a different arena. And this kind of blew my mind, because I never heard this perspective. I've always heard low ticket sales, safety precautions, but he brings up a whole different story, and we're going to play that clip right now for you, and let's check it out.
Sorry.
I just wanted to say how disappointing it was to do all that hard work. The reason I was getting to this point was that I worked so hard with the Warrior, I worked so hard with Hogan, and went through all the I had 3 rental cars destroyed. I had to have limos take me here and there. I never walked down a terminal of an airport. I was always I would go off the airplane, down the steps of an airplane. I'd get into a car with 2 police car escorts. They'd either take me to the arena or take me to my hotel, and I would stay in my hotel, get dressed there. They would call me up and say, "Okay, you're on next." I would go on right before intermission. I'd wrestle my match. I'd go back while they're introducing the intermission and what was coming up, rematches for the next time they were in that city. I'd be back at my hotel or on my way to the airport, so nobody ever saw me coming or going.
Yeah.
And to go through all that and what my poor family went through, my daughters in school and my wife and her friends, and we were friends with Paul Newman, and he snubbed her one night and said, "Your husband, you're anti-American. I don't know if I can be with you." And it broke her heart, and what they all went through. And then we get to WrestleMania 7 and expected to have this 104,000 seat Coliseum filled to the rafters, and then be told, 2 weeks before, Vince said, he called me and said it's going to cost $3 to $4 million to secure the Coliseum. He said, I told him no. He said, we're going indoors. We're going to go into the LA, arena. And he said, but pay-per-view will be tremendous. And of course, as you said, we had the biggest pay-per-view of all time for many years. And it wasn't, I've heard stories, it wasn't over. The angle wasn't over. Slaughter didn't have enough heat on him, and Hogan wasn't hot enough, and that's all BS. The whole reason we didn't go in the Coliseum is because it was going to cost $3 to $4 million to go in there, and Vince didn't want to start out $3 or $4 million in the hole. So that's the reason we did go in there, and it was just a very real disappointment to both Hogan and I to work that hard, especially me, for what I went through before I got to him, and not to be able to put that SO sold out next to my name and his for 104,000, which would have been the all-time record.
That's a lot to break
down.
We
will never know, Steve. We will never know. Would they have sold that place out?
That's the thing, is because at that point, I wonder if you sold 16,000 tickets for, say, the Coliseum, and so it's easy to take 16,000 and just shove them inside the arena.
Yeah, that was an easy sell. Yeah,
that's easy.
But if you know the LA Coliseum, have you ever been there?
I have. I actually went to WrestleMania 39 in LA, so I walked. I walked up to it, looked inside it, and stuff like that. But I didn't actually go inside for an event.
Oh, it's a massive, massive structure, and fits 104,000 people in there. It is not the greatest venue, though, to do anything with, as far as putting a ring in the middle of it, because even for football, those seats are far back. It's a big bowl in the way it was designed. They didn't design it for a football field, really. So anyway, but that's kind of an aside, and whether or not they would have been able to get 104,000 people. And I'm sure it was a security nightmare to have tried to figure out, how do you stop every security breach that you could have there. So the decision was made. I think in the case, as far as keeping everyone safe, it was probably a lot easier to do it in an arena. But I'm sure it's, Sarge was saying there, what a massive disappointment for him, because of, I think he felt that they had, they had the heat to draw that many people there and then set, a great record. So, it is disappointing. I would have loved to have seen what they could have done in that place. And as you said, there's all kinds of stories. They say, oh, were ticket sales enough, or Vince thinking, well, we'll make it back. It's going to, with the pay-per-view gate. So we won't really know. But I just, as far as if you really did look at it from a security viewpoint, if that's what it was, absolutely. I imagine, as you mentioned, with the Super Bowl, they had to spend $3 or $4 million, and Vince didn't want to start already in the hole before they had, anything, anybody step in the ring.
Right. And it took months if no one knows how pay-per-view kind of worked, you didn't get, say, your gate or all the money the next day. It took months upon months upon months to actually receive all the money back from pay-per-views. So even if you were 3 or 4 in the hole, that might hurt you for the next 4 to 6 months, because you're not getting your WrestleMania money until, October. And
and I don't know if we know the final pay-per-view gates. I've looked at a few of the numbers, and it was anywhere from 400,000 to 1 million people were saying. So I don't know what the exact number is, but it wasn't. It was certainly up there, and it was, I think, the 7th pay-per-view event that the WWF had done. So it certainly made money, and I think that match really. That storyline definitely helped the company out tremendously for that period of time, and then saved WrestleMania, because I don't know how much the other matches would have that would have been enough to have made it a major event.
I do feel, though, terribly for Sergeant Slaughter, because he did put his kids, his wife, and his friends, and his livelihood up in the air for a story that he thought would eventually lead to, the Coliseum, 104,000 people. And he can't do that because it's become too real. And people are offended. Bomb threats, death threats, bulletproof vests. Like, this is not a normal situation for him in professional wrestling. So I feel for him. But personally, for you, do you remember that day going to the arena? Like, what were security protocols? Was it different from normal events you've gone to?
Oh yeah. I remember that. Going there, and choppers overhead, and we're used to it now, but seeing these SWAT type law enforcement officers with canines everywhere, and actually I remember seeing a few guys, where they had, it wasn't just a gun, they had, that Uzi looking machine gun type weaponry. And so, that was, and I don't think that you think about it in a sense where it's impacting you personally, but I remember thinking that at that point, like, boy, this really could get scary, that something could happen. I mean, some crazy person could just all of a sudden, run out with a weapon, an automatic weapon, and just start shooting. So that's, we'd gotten kind of used to that at different arenas, but it wasn't on that scale. Was just insane. It was like another world, that like right out of a video game, I guess you could say today. But then it was that security was incredible. Never seen anything like that in my life for any event.
Wow. From that point on, like, even so, that event for you personally, like, what time are you, like, let's go through the process of what time are you showing up? Do you have to, like, you go to arena now, here's your wallet, here's your cell phone, here's your keys. Obviously for performers, you're coming in, but like, they're hoping that you're just going to be easy to get into the building. Fans themselves, like, what do you believe was the process for you personally? Like, are they, patting you down like at an airport? Like, what is the actual?
No, they had the whole deal. And I remember, the wands with the going up and down everybody, and and that's our life now. But to have been subjected to that kind of security back then was pretty scary. Like, you just weren't. It was just like, boy, the world has changed. Things have changed. I wasn't necessarily saying, oh, it's because of Sergeant Slaughter and this storyline, but it was those wake up calls that, the life is changing in America, and certainly right about that. But to see it for the first time, and I'm sure people can relate by maybe the first time they went to the airport and they had to go through a TSA security thing, and you're like thinking, wow, things really are different. And that was for us, where how serious it could get.
Yeah. Yeah, I can only imagine what that day was like. It's funny because you mentioned, there's SWAT and there's helicopters.
Mm.
I don't think I've ever seen a picture online over the years of ever showing the actual situation outside, because you have fans and camera. Everyone has a cell phone, take a picture, boom, it's there. I don't remember or ever seeing a photo of a fan showing up to the arena and being like, look, there's a SWAT team. Look, there's a helicopter.
Yeah.
Like, it's amazing that.
Well, and then we didn't have these either, where we, could just take pictures and video and at a second's notice. But
wow,
it is amazing. We can't feel too badly for Sergeant Slaughter, because that was one of the greatest runs he ever had, and I'm sure he made a fortune during that time.
Oh yeah.
But at the same time, think about at what price, where you really do have to fear, because these guys are not home every night, so they're leaving their families for weeks at a time, and like I said, you don't know, there's some nutcase who decides he's going to make a statement. You're not sleeping very well, I think, when through that whole process. So I guess it does come down to it, at what price. Sarge it was a great point in his career. Like he said, he couldn't go through an airport. They would take him off the plane on when he landed. He didn't go through the terminal.
Right.
So yeah.
Is that worth it to be remembered? I guess it's what you want, or do you want
sure
to be
now?
Forever?
Yeah.
You can be remembered forever. Sure, you remember forever.
But at the time,
what do you think your kids feel like?
Yeah.
What do you think your wife feels like? Still to this day, I imagine they still have memories of, hey, Dad, remember that time?
Well, and then you're thinking, well, all this is to help my, family and take care of them. But at the same time, and it's in a bit of a selfish thing, because you're thinking, this is great for my career, but what toll is it taking on the people that are nearest to me, that are closest to me? That what is it like for them? They have to go to school. I'm sure that that happens all the time, where these guys have to put up with bullies and people coming up and trying to dress them down somehow, or get in some kind of a fight or something. It's not easy.
No.
I'm sure even today, when they've got kids at school.
Of course. And, the final clip I want to play from the interview you had with Sergeant Slaughter is terrifying.
Yeah.
We're bringing it up now in our own words, but let's hear Sergeant Slaughter's words about the situation he was living in daily. In this situation, though, escalates and it goes beyond just, hey, I'm a wrestler, I'm performing for my family. This is terrifying. Let's listen to this.
When I'm going through the airports, they're, eyeball on me and
glaring.
And I get to the car. Now, by this time, because I'm the champion, I get a car, and I make my way to the arena, and I get in a little early. I said, instead of checking in at the hotel, I'm going to go right to the arena. So I go in, I see Jay Strongbow. He was the road agent. He said, Sarge, how you doing? I said, yeah, good. Made it through last night, okay? I said, yeah. He said, that's the hottest thing I've seen, in this business. And you're on your way, kid. And I said, well, good. He said, have you talked to Vince today? And I said, no, I haven't. He said, have you talked to your wife? I said, no, I haven't talked to my wife. I said, is there a problem? He goes, well, I don't know, but you might want to call one of them or call both. So I find a payphone, and I call my wife first. There's no answer. I leave a message. So I call Vince, and of course he's at the office. He said, hey, Sarge, everything good? I said, yeah. He said, you're all right? I said, yeah, I'm fine. He said, well, have you talked to your wife? I said, no. Is there a problem? And he said, well, I hope not. But he said, somebody called the office this morning, and they threatened to kill you, and they threatened to kill your family, threatened to kill me, and kill my family, threatened to blow up your house, blow up my house, blow up the office and the studio. So he said, I took a precaution to call your wife, and I asked her if she could spend the night at a friend's house or in a hotel till I can get some security at your house.
Wow.
I said, oh, thank you very much. So I finally get a hold of my wife, and she's kind of like laughing. She said, because when I came home from Vince's house that night when he told me he wanted to be the Iraqi sympathizer, She said, you can't do that. You're G.I. Joe. You cannot be an Iraqi sympathizer. You're going to get killed. And I said, well, let's see how it goes. So first thing, she's laughing, and she said, Bob? I said, yeah. She says, I told you so.
Yeah.
I said, yeah, I heard that things aren't going so well
Yes.
at the house. She said, well, things are fine. She said, it'll be fine. So I get home like 2 days later, and where I lived in Connecticut, in Western Connecticut, I lived on a plateau. And my drive, the reason I picked this house is because this is even before I was a villain or whatever. It was, the driveway was called Walnut Lane, and it was a dirt road, and it went back about a quarter of a mile. And then you take a sharp left and go up this hill, swerved up, and finally got to the top of this plateau, and there the house was. And the minute I saw it, I fell in love with it. And I hadn't even seen the house. I said, this is it. This is the one I want.
Mm-hmm.
So I figured this is going to be hard for anybody to ever find. So my family would be pretty well protected when I'm gone. So I get home, and I go up the driveway, and there's this Winnebago at the top of my driveway. How it got up there, I have no idea. But they got it up there. And I get out of my car, and 4 gentlemen walked over to me. They got coats on, and they all come over, introduce themselves, and they open up their jackets, and they're packing weapons.
Mm-hmm.
They said, we are security. We've been hired by the WWE to walk the perimeter of your property 24/7, take your children to school, stay with them all day, bring them home, go to the grocery store with your wife, go to restaurants with your wife and children, with you. And I said, well, I don't know about all that. But thank you for being here. So they said, well, we're here till we're told not to be here. So I go in the house, and my wife's, got her arms folded and tapping her foot, as she should be. And she said, what is all of this?
Wow.
She said, I'm not having armed guards at my children's school. I'm not having an armed guard, behind me pushing a
shopping cart.
Yeah. And going to the hairdresser with me and this and that. I said, no, we'll take care of all that.
Yeah.
They're just here when I'm gone. That's all, So she was fine with that. So I was happy because I had a piece of property that was pretty tough to not only find but to walk around.
Man,
Yeah.
we kind of alluded to it, but even his wife is like, I don't know if this was a good idea now because I warned you, and here we are in the situation. Our kids are going to school, and they want armed guards with them.
Yeah, and Sarge, to a point, was used to those kinds of precautions. Like I said, he had been a heel back in the early days, and knew there were threats out there all the time. It was always interesting to me to come out of arenas or even anywhere with guys like that, because it was like hanging with a mobster in a sense, because they would come out and they would initially just kind of assess their environment, that there might be some idiot or somebody who might want to take them on.
Mm-hmm.
That happened all the time, that guys thought, if I could take down Sergeant Slaughter, boy, I'll have bragging rights forever. But this was a whole new level. And when it crosses over to impacting your family, that's a whole different story. These guys, that was how they lived. But when they came home, that was, it. That, they shut the door until they reopened that to get back into that world. So I'm sure Bob didn't really get into it, but I think that affected him a lot to know that, man, not only is this a threat to the company, Vince talking about how, they want to blow up the buildings and everything, but that it impacted his own family to the point where they have to have security there, 24/7, because they don't know what's going to happen. And I'm sure that Bob's wife couldn't wait till this thing wrapped up and they get back to their lives.
And we brought it up earlier. Well, he's doing this for his family.
Yeah.
But now what's happening is he's doing it for his family, but it's affecting his family in not a positive way. It's not like, oh, we have $1 million and we're living the high life. Yeah, we might have that too, but we also have this situation where we might be killed. Our safety is no longer secure, and you come to the point of like, what is worth what you're doing this for your family, but you're doing it for your family. Now it's screwing with your family. So where do you land on like, hey, I'm the world champion, but yet my family might be killed? Like, what I guess is the point of, is it worth it personally for you? You know, I'm a father, and to me, if I'd be, you know, a pig in shit or in mud running around, like, this is a great world champion. Oh shit, my family's their lives are being threatened.
Yeah.
Like, how do you get out? Like, how do you, if you ever have a personal conversation after this interview with Sarge or before when this was going on and saying like, how you doing, man? Like mentally, how are you doing?
Yeah. I remember that point in time as he talked about that. He didn't go anywhere without full security. He did have a bulletproof vest on. He was cocooned, and it was very difficult to even get to him and chat with him about things because it was in and out. He would talk about where he'd be at the hotel until they wanted him to come on, and then they would, he'd be at a place close enough that they just whisk him in and get him out. So you heard his thoughts there, but even then, Sarge would never tell you that, yeah, this is getting to me. Unless it maybe conversations with his wife, maybe with Lord Alfred Hayes, who was a very good friend of his, but he was always the soldier, and he soldiered on. You would have never thought any of this bothered him at all. And you would have thought the opposite. He would have basically saying, I love this, but
which he probably did in a way.
When it's impacting your family, you know better.
Yeah, it hit a new level of just, this is too real. I feel like we brought up when we started the show is sometimes people think wrestling is too real or too fake. Well, we have hit the too real button 10 times over in this situation. I feel for him. I feel for his family. And Sergeant Slaughter eventually does lose the world title at WrestleMania 7 to Hulk Hogan, the American hero. Blood was involved, and there's American flag, and there's blood. Yes. And there's wiping the blood on the American flag. There's some heavy stuff in that matchup, but Hogan does defeat Slaughter. And I wonder at what point where they're like, Sergeant Slaughter and Vince are like, okay, how do we cool this down? Because they again go into SummerSlam 91 that year, and the war is over. The Gulf War is over, but yet we're still angling. I'm an Iraqi sympathizer. We're still going to fight each other at SummerSlam 91. After this, Sergeant Slaughter, he says he wants his country back. He asks for forgiveness of America. And we have the old G.I. Joe, Sergeant Slaughter, back. Yeah. And I wonder if fans, maybe you talked to him after he didn't have security around him all the time, where suddenly he is welcomed back in the arms of wrestling fans and Americans and celebrities. I remember talking to him years ago about how Willie Nelson wouldn't even speak to him because he was so upset that he thought he was really an Iraqi sympathizer. Like, do you have any conversations with him after all this and saying like, hey man, you're a good guy now, but like, do you still wear a bulletproof vest? Like, are people still mad at you over this?
Well, and to Vince's credit that, he was Sergeant Slaughter was a beloved figure before all of this.
Yeah.
And he knew, okay. And they did exactly what they wanted to do. It was a great storyline that went, and they had the exact conclusion that you would have wanted with America prevails, the bad guys lose, but then you got to fix it. They owed him that. But you couldn't just say, okay, he's all good now. He decided he was wronged, and that one match straightened him out. No, you have to have another storyline that's going to fix it. And that was what that was all about. And I know through conversations with him that as much as he always said, I love being a heel, he also loved the character that he had so developed and was so dear to his heart, it really became a part of him. And we know there's superstars that are like that, where it does become a part of him. He is Sergeant Slaughter. He is so I know he missed it. And when he got it back, he appreciated everything about it. I think it made him really appreciate what he had accomplished in his career, what he meant to wrestling fans the world over. And so, I think he was very happy to once again get his country back, that he was Sergeant Slaughter, and the stars and stripes and all the patriotism that he epitomized. So I think that, he definitely loved to go back to being Sergeant Slaughter, babyface.
Right. And they put him on with Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Mr. America, one of your former podcast co-hosts. So that was a good idea to strap Mr. America with the guy who used to have an issue. And even Nikolai Volkov eventually turned into a babyface too. So there's a lot of people who were evil then turned good because they realized, Americana was the way to go. I want my country back.
And Steve, all was not right in the world until Sergeant Slaughter was, again, our beloved Sergeant Slaughter. So once that was all corrected, it was like, okay, we're all good.
Man, we unpacked life-threatening situations here, bomb threats, bulletproof vests, Warrior getting receipts, Hogan bleeding all over the place. And I got to say, this is one of the biggest topics in professional wrestling still to this day of, was it too real for wrestling fans? Was it too real for an audience at home? But all I have to say is I had a great time talking about it with you today, Sean Mooney. Always a pleasure. Where would you rank this? Was it too real for wrestling fans, though? Do you think like maybe we shouldn't have done this, or we're still talking about it 25 years later, so we did something right?
No, I think it was absolutely right. I think it was something that was timely. I think they pulled it off. They knew when to pull it back at some point, but they still had a tremendous finish. So overall, I mean, it was one of the greatest heat involved matches in the history of professional wrestling. I mean, you got to talk about the top 5 of.
Oh yeah,
this was just unbelievable, and then it was great to see this happen for Sergeant Slaughter. He's a great guy. And has done so much and loved this business forever. So I just think all the way around, if you ever want to wonder what's heat in professional wrestling, this is a case study right here of how it's done. It was to the extreme, but I think it was one of the best ever.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And again, in that era of the Hulk Hogan golden era of wrestling, you only have a few world champions, and Sergeant Slaughter is one of them forever. Not everyone becomes world champion, but Sergeant Slaughter did. So again, thank you, Sean Mooney, for being here on 10 Count Media. I'm Seafall. He's Sean Mooney. Have a wonderful day, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.